All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Trey Churchill. I'm a managing director here at TopStep, and I'll be presenting our webinar today. We're going to be talking about user entity tags. This is a cool feature that not everyone knows about. And even if you do know about it, it can be a little bit confusing when you first start looking at it. So we're hoping to take a little bit of the mystery out of that process and show you how this feature can help improve your reporting out of OpenAir. All right, so we're going to talk about using these for metrics, tagging them in custom calcs, and then the pros and cons. So again, the entity tag is an optional feature. We can associate dates to field values for users. If you look at the screen now that we see that the user and entity tag tab is set up under the user record. All right, and then here we have our different components of the tag values. We have our default tag, and then we have the historical entity tags that add our start and end dates. And then we can move users from one value to another and track that over time, unlike a regular drop-down menu, which loses that historical data. Okay, so I think we're caught up. Sorry about that. All right, so we set up our tag group called department. We're setting up our tag attributes, which are the values that we're associating to the department. So here we have management, NetSuite practice, support, subcontractors, so on and so forth. It's very important that we check the box, searchable tag group. So whenever we're looking for our resource in the resources module, we have the option to look them up by that attribute. All right, so like we were talking about, we have the default entity tag, which is effectively our current value. You'll notice that there's no start or end date associated with the default. This is quite simply what is in the system. Then below here, we have the historical entity tags, which do have a start and end date. So in this example, we have a resource who was in the subcontractor department from 5/1/17 through 7/31/18. Now, in this example, we're effectively moving the user effective August 1st, 2018, because that's the next date that follows the end date of the historical value. So now we have our default value is NetSuite practice. All right, and here what we can see is that instead of having that date range, and the report is going to show us whatever the current value is, now we have that historical value, so that if we use our entity tag group as a subtotal, we can see the data that's flowing across the time frame of our report. So notice that until August, this user was not in the NetSuite practice, they were in the subcontractor practice. So we're only seeing one group of data under subcontractors. We've got a 0 for NetSuite. And then when we have our effective change, we can see the opposite. All of our numbers are showing up under the correct department value. So one of the common ways that people sort of group users in the system in OpenAir is with cost center. So I want to talk a little bit about the entity tag versus a cost center. So the entity tags allow you to manually update your dates, your start and end date associated with that value. Whereas cost centers have an inheritance scheme that takes effect immediately after the update. Similar to what we were talking about previously, either they are or are not in a cost center. We can't see what cost center they were in. So we talked about department. Let's talk about a couple of other really common ways that these tags are used. One is utilization. I highly, highly, highly recommend using entity tags to track utilization, and here's why. So we can set an employment status, which shows us when an employee was or was not with the company. And also what if they've changed employment type. So if we move from employee to subcontractor, so on and so forth. Also, here's the trick that we always talk about here with our clients. Include in utilization, yes or no. Simply put, this is whether we want a user to show up in our utilization report. We might have users who share, for example, the same department, but some of these users are billable resources and some are not. And for our reporting purposes, we may not want to see those non-billable resources. We don't want their metrics mingling with the users whose data we really care about. We can also use entity tags to track changes to location for users. So for example, if they report to a new office or move to a different country, changes to departments, which we already looked at, and also if we are moving their role internally in the system, we might want to track their data separately based on what they are doing for the company. So basically, like it says here, anything that might normally be a checkbox or a drop-down field, there's a good chance that you might be able to get some more usage out of your reporting tool if you start using an entity tag for that value. So our default value, some things to remember. This is what the system is going to show you. So when I go into a report and I say, I only want to report on resources who are currently employed, I only want to see that data. That's the filter tag group attribute that I'm using in my report, is what is here in the default. So I want to see employed. I'm going to say show me only employed, and it's going to show me people whose attribute is employed during the time frame of my report. Now, if we don't want to use a default value, we can simply just extend this concept of dating these values to the historical value. So in our example in the screenshot, hopefully you can see that we have a start date of 1100, which is effectively meant to represent any date that predates our likely reporting time period. Most of our reports don't go back that far. If they did, it would take quite a while to run, I imagine. Let's see. And then if you have the end date set to 12/10, for example, 12/10, 2016 here, what we're effectively saying is that this resource was hired on 12/11, 2016. So we could either represent that by having the employed attribute set as a default and not having the historical tag value, or we could just get rid of using defaults altogether and just say, here's my employment date. It's 12/11 through 16. And then if we want, we can go ahead and push that date so far out in the future that it's going to definitely fall within any of our likely reporting timeframes. So in our example here, we have a user who is hired on 15th of March, 2016. So we can have the historical entity tag of not employed starting way back in the past, and then the end date being the last date before their default value should be taken into account, or the 15th. So that's why we have 3/14/2016 here. Now it looks like we're hiring this resource directly into a billable role, but they have a 90-day ramp up time before we really want to include them in our reporting. So we're going to track that with including utilization is yes. We've got their department noted here. And then in our scenario, after 1 year, the resource is promoted and no longer needs to be included in utilization. So we're going to change that date to default to no, and then we would move the historical including utilization value of yes to represent that 1 year time period when they were actually included in utilization. So if we were getting kind of crazy and we wanted to have a multi-year reporting period, we could actually show them in the utilization for a year, and then they would drop out of the calculations. You can see how those values are entered here under historical tags. So including utilization goes from no to yes, and then back to no as a default. Hopefully that makes sense. We can follow the start and end dates of those values to see how those changes would appear on a report. And then when our resource leaves, we would change the employment status default to non-employed. And then our historical employment status of employed would represent the time period that they were with us. And all of this can be represented in your report using filters. Now, kind of going along these lines of reporting, we can get a little more detailed here, and we can actually build out our custom calculations for use in our cross-tabbed or summary reports with filters for these tag values. So we have our entity tags appear in the filters under the custom calculation. So in this example, you can see we've kind of blown up what that would look like down below our custom calculation settings. We have the department, employment status, including utilization. For the purposes of utilization calculations, for example, you might want to set all of those defaults to only employees that we want to see. And then we can run our reporting, and we don't actually have to use the filters directly in the reports themselves. The custom calculation is going to do all that filtering for us. So here we have a couple of examples of a job code capacity where we're tracking our data based on a job code tag value. All right, let's talk about some pros and cons here. Let's start with the negatives and then end on a high note. So it's true, using entity tags will definitely add a layer of complexity to your administration of your users, no doubt. It's also going to mean that if we have those filters set in custom calculations, for example, we may forget, we might run a report with a calc, not see some user information, wonder why, have to drill in a little bit. What does this entail? Well, you have to maintain these. So you can either do so manually by going into the user record, clicking on the entity tag tab, selecting the data, typing in the dates. We actually have the ability to script this for you. We can build a custom JavaScript that can track and update the data for you. And then you can also populate those values and update those tag values via an integration with your HR system or whatever system where those changes are being initiated. It does seem like it could be a little redundant, right? Because, for example, department, job code, those are items that employment type, you might even have an employment type drop down on the demographic page. And so if you do already have those, you might ask yourself, why do I want to have to track this twice? And also, we're only able to track these changes in a user record. It would be nice if we had the same concept and feature, for example, on a project where we could see the date when a project was moved to a different project stage, for example, or when it was marked inactive or something like that. There's options for that require a little bit of customization that TopStep could certainly help you with. But unfortunately, you can't leverage entity tags for that type of record. Now, finally, let's talk about why would we want to use these. Again, date control of the changes to our data. We're going to get, quite honestly, more accurate reporting. You know, if we have a resource again who goes from a non-billable to a billable capacity and then back again, our report, we should be able to run one report that's only going to give us the data that's relevant to that, you know, to the billable capacity time period. We shouldn't have to carve out users manually. You know, it's all about not having to do a bunch of rework in Excel once we get our data out of the system. And then just for you know, housekeeping and timekeeping, you can retain your historical data state. We can see when these changes took place. You can report it. You can, you know, obviously click into the user record and see their historical entity tag data to see when certain changes were made. And then, you know, again, utilization. It's all about utilization. This is absolutely key in getting really, really good, strong utilization numbers out of your system. And remember, we talked about checking that box to make it searchable. You can use these values in your resource searches. So under the advanced research or advanced resource search and the custom search in the resources module, in addition to any skill profiles or anything that you set up, you can actually grab only people from specific departments. We mentioned you could use this to track people's locations. So if we only want, you know, we have a project and the client only wants local, quote unquote, local resources, we can restrict our resource search to only people in specific geographical locations. All right, in summary, so entity tags assist you with date-driven data. We're tracking metrics for resources, and we want to see the dates associated with when those values were updated. This is how we do it. It's great for reporting. You set this up correctly, and you can get those values that you need in your reporting, exclude values that you don't want in your reporting, and not have to, again, pick and choose, remove lines from an exported Excel file, so on and so forth. You can use it in scheduling, like we just talked about, by making them searchable. And then finally, take advantage of the automation opportunities that exist with OpenAir via script or integration to basically do all of the legwork for you and keep your users in sync between your systems. Okay, if you have more questions, you want to know more about OpenAir, just keep in mind that TopStep is a leading provider of business efficiency solutions for your PS business operations. We've served over 360 clients. Our team has deep expertise in business operations specific to the professional services sector. And we design our services to help your organization work more effectively and efficiently. And then we have our website here where you can find the recordings of other webinars like this. We have white papers. We post blogs on topics ranging from system agnostic professional services considerations and concerns all the way through, you know, really deep dives into tool functionality. And follow us on Twitter for more updates and join our LinkedIn group.